The weight of my laptop bag dug into my shoulder as I stood outside the five-star hotel where I'd just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. Rain soaked through my simple blazer, the one I deliberately kept plain and unassuming. Tomorrow, the business pages would announce my company's latest acquisition, but tonight, my family still thought I was the disappointing daughter who couldn't even hold down a receptionist job. The ultimate family failure. Little did they know, I was about to walk into our annual reunion with my personal chauffeur in tow and finally show them exactly who I'd become while they were busy underestimating me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor, did you file those invoices yet? Mr. Patterson has been asking about them all morning. Janice's voice cut through the open office space, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. I kept my eyes on my computer screen, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing my frustration. As the office manager, Janice took particular pleasure in reminding me, and everyone else, that I was merely a temp filling in as an administrative assistant. They're done. I sent them 20 minutes ago, I replied, voice level despite the knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't supposed to be my life at 32, not even close. I glanced at the clock, 5:47 p.m. Nearly 12 hours since I'd first sat down at this desk, but I couldn't leave yet, not until I finished this last spreadsheet. Not until Janice had gone home and I could finally access the financial templates I needed without raising suspicions. This was my fourth job this year, a fact my father never failed to mention at family gatherings. Eleanor's exploring her options, he'd say with that thin smile that never reached his eyes. Still figuring things out. The words always dripped with disappointment, as if I were 16 instead of 32, as if each job wasn't strategically chosen for what I could learn from it. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Catherine. Don't forget dinner tonight, at Dad's, 7:30 sharp. Wear something nice for once, please. Morgan and Robert will be there with their kids. And yes, Dad wants an update on your career situation. I suppressed a sigh. Morgan, my older sister, and her husband Robert were my father's pride and joy. Both successful attorneys at the same prestigious firm with a beautiful Victorian, home in the suburbs, and two perfectly behaved children who attended the right private school. Then there was Catherine, the middle child, a pediatrician married to a surgeon. Between them, they'd fulfilled every expectation my father had ever articulated after our mother died when I was 12. And then there was me, Eleanor Reed, the family disappointment. The office emptied gradually until only the cleaning staff remained, plus me, still hunched over spreadsheets. I waited until Janice's car pulled out of the parking lot before opening my secure encrypted hard drive and extracting the templates I'd been developing for months. I wasn't just an administrative assistant. This temp job, like the others before it, was strategic reconnaissance. 4 years ago, after being laid off, from a promising position at a financial consulting firm during company-wide cuts, I'd made a decision. Instead of desperately clinging to the corporate ladder where my worth was determined by others, I would build something of my own, something they couldn't take away from me again. So I launched Monarch Financial Solutions, a boutique consulting firm specializing in helping struggling companies restructure their operations for maximum efficiency and profitability. My experience watching businesses fail from the inside had taught me exactly where the weak points typically were, and more importantly, how to fix them. But I kept it quiet. Operated under the company name rather than my own. Used an LLC that couldn't be easily traced back to me. Hired a virtual assistant for client communications. In the eyes of my family, I was still floundering, unable to find stability. Why the secrecy? Perhaps it was self-preservation. My father had spent my entire life predicting my failure. When I chose economics instead of pre-law at university, he'd shaken his head. Not practical enough, he declared. When I joined a startup instead of an established firm after graduation, he'd warned everyone it would collapse. When it did 3 years later, though through no fault of mine, his knowing nods had been almost unbearable. After 2 decades of crushing expectations and subtle undermining, I couldn't bear to have him witness my fledgling company's vulnerable early stages. I couldn't stomach the doubtful questions, the skeptical glances, the waiting for me to fail again. So I decided he would see nothing until there was something undeniable to see. I packed away my laptop as my phone buzzed again. Running late. Dad's already making comments. Hurry up. Catherine. I texted back a brief acknowledgement and headed for the parking garage. My car, a 10-year-old Honda with a dent in the passenger door, was reliable but unremarkable. Exactly how I wanted it. The truth was, I could afford something far more luxurious now. Monarch had grown exponentially in the past 2 years, with 7 full-time employees and a client list that now included 2 Fortune 500 companies. My first major client had been Everton Manufacturing, a medium-sized company hemorrhaging money despite solid products. The CEO had been skeptical about hiring my unknown firm, but desperate times had made him willing to take chances. I'd restructured their entire operation, trimmed unnecessary expenses, renegotiated supplier contracts, and implemented new inventory management systems. Within 6 months, they'd turned their first profit in 3 years. Word had spread, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Business owners talked. Success created ripples. My phone began ringing with referrals. Now Monarch generated over 7 figures in annual revenue. My personal income had crossed into the mid-6 figures. I owned a beautiful loft downtown, though I gave my family a different address and had investments across multiple sectors. But as far as they knew, I was still the struggling youngest daughter, bouncing between temporary jobs. I could have told them, of course, could have arrived at family gatherings in designer clothes and a luxury car, flaunting my success. But something held me back. Perhaps I was waiting for the perfect moment. Perhaps I wanted my success to be so overwhelming that even my father couldn't diminish it with a casual remark or skeptical question. Or perhaps, most honestly, I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized how completely he had underestimated me. I pulled into my father's driveway at 7:43 p.m. The lights were on, illuminating the stately colonial where I'd grown up. I could see silhouettes moving behind the dining room curtains, my family, already seated, undoubtedly discussing my tardiness and unreliability. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My clothes were simple but good quality, a gray blouse and black pants that could pass for ordinary office wear, but were actually from a boutique designer. My makeup was minimal, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing that would suggest I'd closed a $2.4 million consulting contract just hours earlier. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. My father stood there, tall and imposing despite being in his late 60s, silver hair perfectly combed, wearing a dress shirt and slacks, even for a family dinner at home. "You're late, Eleanor," he said by way of greeting. His eyes flicked over my modest outfit with familiar disappointment. "Sorry, Dad. Work ran long." I gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, which he accepted stiffly. "Temporary work shouldn't demand overtime," he commented as he closed the door behind me. "That's the advantage of being expendable. Regular hours." I bit my tongue against this retort that bubbled up. The irony was rich. My temporary work today had involved analyzing profitability projections for a potential $12 million expansion of one of my clients' manufacturing facilities. But to him, I was just an admin assistant who couldn't manage her time. The dining room fell silent as I entered. Morgan and Robert sat on one side of the table with their children, Emma and Liam, perfectly groomed in coordinating outfits. Catherine and her husband Michael sat opposite them. The head of the table, my father's domain, was empty, with a single place setting to his right for me. "Finally decided to join us?" Morgan said with a tight smile. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light as she reached for her wine glass. Traffic, I said simply, taking my seat. The dinner progressed as these gatherings typically did. My father asked Morgan about her recent case, a high-profile corporate merger, which led to Robert describing the partners' praise for their work. Catherine shared stories about the new pediatric wing at her hospital, where Michael had just been appointed as surgical director. The children recited their recent academic achievements when prompted. Then, inevitably, attention turned to me. "Eleanor," my father said as he cut into his roast beef, "Catherine tells me you're working as a secretary again." "Administrative assistant," I corrected mildly. "It's temporary." "Of course it is," he replied. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "So what's the plan this time?" Morgan asked, feigning concern. "Are you still thinking about going back to school? Dad and I were talking about certificate programs that might help you get something more stable." I took a slow sip of water. "I'm exploring my options." "You've been exploring your options for years now," my father said. "At some point, exploration needs to yield results." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had throughout childhood whenever I brought home a 97% instead of 100%, or placed second in a competition instead of first. In the Reed family, second place might as well have been last. "I'm actually working on something," I said carefully. "A project that's starting to gain traction." Robert raised an eyebrow. "What kind of project?" I hesitated. This wasn't how I wanted to reveal Monarch, not as a project to be picked apart and questioned at the dinner table. "It's a consulting initiative," I said vaguely. My father scoffed. "Consulting requires clients, Eleanor, and credentials." "I have both," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Let me guess," Morgan interjected. "You're helping small businesses with their social media or something equally modest." The condescension in her voice made my fingers tighten around my fork. My sister had no idea that just last month I'd advised the CEO of a company where she desperately wanted to land an account. He'd asked for my opinion on their legal representation, and I'd recommended a different firm. The irony would have been delicious if it weren't so bitter. "Something like that," I murmured. "Well," my father said, setting down his knife with finality, "perhaps it's time to be realistic. I've been patient, Eleanor. We all have. But you're 32 years old, still jumping between temporary jobs, living in that cramped apartment, driving a car that's practically falling apart. Your sisters had established careers and homes of their own by your age." "Everyone has their own timeline, Dad," Catherine offered half-heartedly. He waved her comment away. "Timeline is one thing. Direction is another. Eleanor seems to lack both." The familiar speech continued as I picked at my food, letting his criticism wash over me like rain on a window. I'd heard it all before. How I lacked focus, commitment, the drive to succeed. How I'd squandered opportunities. How disappointed my mother would have been. That last barb always cut the deepest. She had been gone for 20 years, yet he wielded her memory like a weapon when he wanted to truly make a point. "I've made some calls," he announced suddenly. "Richard Wilson's firm is looking for an executive assistant. It's entry-level, but it's permanent, with benefits. A foot in the door at a respectable company. I've arranged an interview for you. Next Wednesday at 10 a.m. The table fell silent. My father hadn't directly intervened in my career since I was fresh out of college. The fact that he was doing so now, securing me an interview for an assistant position no less, was the ultimate declaration of his assessment of my capabilities. "Thank you," I said finally, voice tight, "but I'll have to decline." His fork clattered against his plate. "Decline? Why on earth would you decline?" "Because I'm busy on Wednesday." among other reasons, like the fact that I hadn't interviewed for an assistant position in nearly a decade, or that my company's quarterly revenue now exceeded what this respectable executive assistant would make in several years. Busy with what? Another temporary job? His voice had taken on the dangerous quiet tone I remembered from childhood disagreements. Eleanor, I'm trying to help you. We all are. But you need to help yourself too. Emma, Morgan's 8-year-old daughter, looked up from her plate. Aunt Eleanor, is that why you're the family failure? Because you can't keep a job? The table froze. Morgan gasped. Emma, where did you hear that term? Emma looked confused by the adult's reaction. Daddy said it to you last week. He said, Eleanor is the family failure, and that's why we shouldn't— That's enough, Emma, Robert cut in sharply. The damage was done. I looked around the table at their embarrassed faces. Not embarrassed because they disagreed with the assessment, but because it had been spoken aloud by a child who didn't know better than to repeat adults' private conversations. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Eleanor, Catherine began. I raised a hand to stop her. It's fine, really. My voice was surprisingly steady. This isn't news to me. I've been the family failure since I chose economics instead of law school. Nothing I've done since has changed that. Perception, so why would it change now? My father's face had reddened. You're making a scene. No, Dad. For once, I'm just acknowledging the truth. I stood, surprising even myself with my calmness. And since we're being honest, I should tell you all that I won't be at the next family dinner. I'm going to be out of the country on business. Morgan rolled her eyes. What? Another temp assignment sending you to make copies in Canada? I smiled for the first time that evening. Not exactly, but I appreciate your concern. As I walked to the door, my father followed, lowering his voice. Eleanor, you're overreacting. Sit down and finish dinner. I turned to face him. You know, Dad, you've spent my entire life telling me what I can't do, what I won't achieve, how I'll never measure up. Maybe it's time you considered the possibility that you might be wrong. His expression hardened. I've only ever been realistic about your prospects. Someone needs to be. In that moment, looking at his absolute certainty in my limitations, something shifted within me. A decision crystallized, one that had been forming for months. The annual family reunion is in 2 weeks, I said. I'll be there. With another excuse for why your life is still stalled? He asked. I smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. No, Dad, with the truth. As I drove away from the house where I'd grown up feeling perpetually inadequate, I made a phone call. Simone, it's Eleanor Reed. I need to accelerate our timeline. How quickly can Forbes run the piece? On the other end, the journalist who'd been pursuing an interview with me for months sounded surprised. We could have it ready for digital release in about 10 days if you give me that exclusive interview tomorrow. Perfect. And the print edition? That would hit stands 3 days after the digital launch. I calculated quickly. The digital article would release just before the family reunion, with the print magazine available the day of the event. Let's do it. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, Eleanor Reed, the family failure, would step into the sunlight, and decades of shadows would finally lift. The thought of my father's face when he realized who I'd become, what I'd built while he was busy dismissing me, brought a satisfaction deeper than I'd like to admit. Sometimes success isn't just about proving yourself right. Sometimes it's about proving others wrong, and I was about to do exactly that. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I entered my downtown loft and kicked off my sensible flats, letting them land haphazardly by the door. The contrast between my father's colonial house and my modern penthouse couldn't have been more striking. Where his home was all traditional wood and heritage furniture, Mine featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, minimalist decor, and state-of-the-art technology integrated into nearly every surface. I poured myself a glass of Macallan 18, a luxury I allowed myself after particularly trying days, and walked to the window wall. The city lights twinkled below like fallen stars, each one representing dreams, ambitions, struggles. Somewhere out there were other women like me, fighting battles no one knew about, building empires in silence. My phone buzzed with an incoming, "Call, Catherine." I considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the third ring. "Hey, Eleanor, I'm sorry about dinner." Her voice was tight with genuine regret. "That was awful. What Emma said?" "Children repeat what they hear," I replied, surprising myself with how little emotion I felt. At least now I know where I stand officially. "It's not like that. Robert shouldn't have said it, but..." "But what? He's not wrong?" I took a sip of the scotch, letting the warmth slide down my throat. By the family's metrics, I am a failure. I don't have the prestigious career, the picture-perfect spouse, the house in the suburbs with the white picket fence. I don't fit into Dad's vision of success. Catherine was quiet for a moment. "None of us do, not really. We just fake it better." That caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry years of unspoken weight. "You think Morgan's happy? She works 80-hour weeks and barely sees her kids. Robert's been passed over for partner twice now. They're drowning in debt trying to maintain the lifestyle Dad expects." I blinked, processing this new information. "And you and Michael?" "Michael hates surgery. Did you know that? He wanted to be a family physician, but Dad made it clear that wasn't prestigious enough for a Reed son-in-law, and I..." She trailed off. "You what?" "I'm good at what I do. I love my patients. But sometimes I wonder if I chose pediatrics because I wanted to, or because it was the acceptable compromise between Dad's expectations and what I could tolerate." I moved to my sleek white couch and sank into the cushions. "Why are you telling me this now, Catherine?" "Because you walked out tonight with this look in your eyes. Like you've made a decision, and I just..." She hesitated. "I wanted you to know that however it looks from the outside, you're not the only one struggling with Dad's expectations. You're just the only one brave enough to forge your own path." The admission hung between us, both surprising and not. I'd been so focused on my own relationship with our father that I'd never truly considered how my sisters might be suffering under the same pressures, just in different ways. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "What are you planning, Ellie?" She hadn't called me by my childhood nickname in years. "For the reunion, I mean." I smiled to myself. "Let's just say I'm done living in the shadows." That sounds ominous. It's not, I promise. But I think it's time everyone knew who I really am. I paused, then added, "You might want to prepare yourself, and maybe prepare Dad, though I doubt anything could." "Now I'm really intrigued," Catherine said, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. "Whatever it is, I'm in your corner. I should have been all along." After we hung up, I walked to my home office, a room my family had never seen and would scarcely believe. One wall was dedicated to awards and press mentions Monarch had received, while another displayed framed photos with clients and business partners. My desk, a custom piece made from reclaimed wood and steel, faced the windows so I could draw inspiration from the city below. I opened my laptop and pulled up the draft of the Forbes article Simone had sent earlier for my review. The headline read, "The Invisible Empire: How Eleanor Reed Built a $30 million Consulting Firm Without Anyone Noticing." The article detailed my journey, from being laid off to identifying a gap in the market for tailored financial rescue strategies. That actually worked. It highlighted my unconventional approach, working temporary jobs at struggling companies to gain insider knowledge of their operations before approaching them as a consultant. It praised my unique business model that tied Monarch's fees directly to measured improvements in client profitability. What the article didn't mention, because I hadn't shared it, was the personal reason behind my secrecy. The family dynamics that had made me hide my success rather than celebrate it openly. The father whose approval I'd simultaneously craved and rejected. The complicated psychology behind building something spectacular while pretending to be ordinary. Perhaps that was a story for another day. I approved the draft with minimal changes and sent a quick email to Simone confirming our interview tomorrow. Then I picked up my phone to make one more call. "Julian, it's Eleanor. I need to make some arrangements for the Stevenson family reunion in 2 weeks." Julian had been my executive assistant for 3 years now, a brilliant Oxford graduate, who could have worked anywhere but chose Monarch because he believed in our mission. He was also discreet to a fault, which made him perfect for this particular task. "The charade is ending, I take it?" His British accent carried a hint of approval. "Yes, it's time." I explained what I needed, including the timing of the Forbes article and the specifics for the day of the reunion. "Consider it done," he said. "And if I may say so, it's about bloody time. Hiding your light has gone on long enough." After hanging up, I walked back to the window. The city never slept, and neither did ambition. So many nights I'd stood here, looking out at this view, wondering if I was building my company for the right reasons. Was I driven by genuine passion for the work? Or was I subconsciously trying to prove my father wrong? The truth, as always, was complicated. Yes, I'd wanted to show him, to show all of them, that they had underestimated me. But beyond that initial spark of defiance, I'd discovered something far more valuable. I was genuinely excellent at what I did. I had a gift for seeing the potential in struggling businesses, for identifying the precise points of failure and engineering targeted solutions. I'd saved thousands of jobs, helped dozens of entrepreneurs realize their visions, and built a company that operated with integrity and innovation. My phone buzzed again. A text from Morgan. What was that dramatic exit about? "Dad's furious. You're making things difficult for everyone as usual." I didn't respond. In 2 weeks, she'd understand. They all would. Instead, I opened my calendar and reviewed the next day's schedule. Before meeting Simone for the Forbes interview, I had an 8 a.m. video call with a potential client in Singapore, a manufacturing firm that needed to optimize their supply chain. At 11, I would review quarterly projections with my CFO. At 1 p.m., I was due at the office for a team meeting about our expansion into the European market, all this while my family thought I was answering phones and filing paperwork as a temp. The irony wasn't lost on me, how I'd spent years cultivating a double life, becoming increasingly successful while maintaining the appearance of failure. But the charade had taken its toll. The constant downplaying, the deliberate choice of unassuming clothes, the small apartment I kept leased in my name even though I lived in this luxurious loft, the older car I drove only for family gatherings, all of it had served its purpose. But the time for masks had passed. I thought back to where it all began, the day I was laid off from Preston Consulting Group 4 years ago. I'd been one of their most promising analysts, consistently exceeding targets, bringing in new clients. But when the company faced financial troubles after losing a major account, they cut staff across all departments. I was one of the last hired, so I was one of the first fired. Simple corporate math. I remember standing in the lobby with my box of personal items, stunned and directionless. I'd called my father, seeking not advice but simply comfort. "Well, what did you expect?" he'd said instead. "These fly-by-night consulting firms are always unstable. Should have gone with an established company like I told you. Or better yet, followed your sisters into a proper profession." I'd ended, the call feeling worse than before, but something had hardened within me that day. A determination not just to find another job, but to create something of my own. something no one could take away. The following weeks had been a blur of research and planning. I'd used my savings to rent a tiny office and build a professional website. I'd reached out to former clients, offering my services as an independent consultant at reduced rates to build my portfolio. Most declined. Individual consultants rarely inspired confidence, especially young female ones without the backing of an established firm. Then came my breakthrough. A former colleague had taken a job at Everton Manufacturing and mentioned they were struggling. On a whim, I'd applied for a temporary administrative position in their finance department. 2 weeks in, I'd identified 5 critical inefficiencies in their operations. I documented everything, created detailed solutions, and drafted implementation timelines. When my temporary assignment ended, I approached the CEO directly, presenting my findings and offering my services as a consultant to implement the changes. He'd been skeptical, but desperate enough to take a chance. 3 months later, Everton had reversed its downward trajectory. 6 months later, they were profitable again. The CEO became my most vocal advocate, recommending me to his entire business network. Monarch Financial Solutions was born. I'd chosen the company name deliberately. The monarch butterfly undergoes a complete transformation, emerging from its chrysalis as something entirely new and capable of soaring. That metamorphosis resonated with me on a profound level. As Monarch grew, I made a strategic decision to keep my personal profile low while building the company's reputation. At first, it was practical. Clients took the firm more seriously than they took me individually. But as success mounted, my reasons for maintaining the separation became more personal. Each family dinner where my father dismissed my potential, each condescending remark from Morgan about my temp jobs, each well-intentioned but patronizing suggestion from Catherine about career paths I might consider, all reinforced my decision to keep my success private until it was too overwhelming to deny. I walked to my bedroom, where I'd already laid out my outfit for tomorrow's interview, a tailored Armani suit in deep burgundy with subtle gold accessories. Professional but boldly confident. The real Eleanor Reed, not the muted version I presented to my family. The chauffeur was actually Julian's idea. "If you're going to make an entrance," he'd said with his characteristic British understatement, "make it properly theatrical." I'd initially hesitated. It seemed unnecessarily flashy. But the more I thought about it, the more appropriate it felt. After years of deliberately downplaying my success, the time for subtlety had passed. Besides, the look on my father's face, when a uniformed driver opened the door of a Rolls-Royce for his failure daughter, would be worth whatever judgment followed. I slipped into bed, my mind racing with thoughts of the coming days, the Forbes interview tomorrow, the article release, the family reunion. After years of careful planning and silent achievement, everything was about to change. My phone buzzed, one final time. A text from my father. "We need to discuss your behavior at dinner. Call me tomorrow." I placed the phone face down on my nightstand without replying. In 2 weeks, we'd have plenty to discuss, but not on his terms. For once, the conversation would happen on mine. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the young woman who had stood in that lobby 4 years ago, clutching a box of belongings and fighting back tears. How I wished I could tell her what lay ahead. That her lowest moment would become the catalyst for her greatest triumph. That her father's doubt would fuel her determination. That one day she would build something so undeniable that even he would have to acknowledge her success. Sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who inadvertently push you to achieve the most. My father had never intended to motivate me with his dismissal. He genuinely believed I would fail. But in his certainty of my limitations, he had given me the greatest gift of all, the burning desire to prove him wrong. And in 2 weeks, at the annual Stevenson family reunion, that's exactly what I would do. The next morning, I stood in Monarch's headquarters on the 32nd floor of the Archer building downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city, a view I'd earned through years of relentless work. Our office space occupied the entire floor, with an open central area surrounded by glass-walled conference rooms and private offices. The design was intentional: transparency paired with privacy, collaboration with focus. Ms. Reed, Simone Blackwell, from Forbes is here, announced Zara, our receptionist. I smoothed down my burgundy Armani suit and adjusted the delicate gold necklace at my throat. Show her to the East Conference Room, please, and have Julian bring in the presentation materials. Zara nodded efficiently. At 25, she was brilliant, ambitious, and reminded me of myself a decade ago. Except she had something I never did: a mentor who believed in her potential. I'd hired her directly out of college against my HR director's recommendation, sensing the same hunger for achievement that had driven me. 2 years later, she was completing her MBA part-time while managing our front office with impeccable precision. I took a deep breath, preparing for the Forbes interview I'd delayed for months. When Simone had first reached out, Monarch was still growing, still proving itself. Now, with our client list expanding internationally and our valuation climbing, the timing felt right, especially with the family reunion approaching. Simone Blackwell rose as I entered the conference room. With her cropped silver hair and tailored navy pantsuit, she embodied the sleek professionalism Forbes was known for. We shook hands, her grip firm and direct. "Eleanor Reed," she said with genuine warmth. "Finally, the woman behind the mystery. Thank you for agreeing to this interview." "The timing felt right," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Monarch is entering a new phase of growth. Transparency seems appropriate." Julian entered with a tablet and several glossy presentation folders. At 42, he'd worked for multinational corporations and billionaire entrepreneurs before joining Monarch. He could have commanded a far higher salary elsewhere, but as he'd explained during his interview, "I've served those who inherited their empires. I'd prefer to help build one from the ground up." "Ms. Blackwell," he acknowledged with his crisp British accent. "A pleasure to meet you. I've prepared the documentation you requested: client testimonials, growth projections, and the official company history. All vetted by legal, of course." "Of course," Simone smiled. "Though I'm more interested in the unofficial story, the human element behind the success." Julian gave me a knowing look as he set the materials on the table. "Then you're in for quite a tale. Ms. Reed is nothing if not unconventional." He excused himself, closing the door quietly behind him. Simone positioned her recorder between us. "Do you mind if I record our conversation? My notes never capture everything." I nodded my consent and she activated the device. "Let's start at the beginning," she suggested. "What made you launch Monarch in the first place? Most financial consultants spend years at established firms building networks before venturing out on their own. You were relatively young, with limited industry connections. What gave you the confidence to make that leap?" I considered the question carefully. The professional answer would focus on market gaps and business opportunities, but she'd asked for the human element, the truth behind the success. "Necessity," I admitted, "and perhaps a touch of desperation. I was laid off from Preston Consulting Group during corporate downsizing. It wasn't personal, just business, but it made me realize how precarious employment can be when someone else controls your fate." So Monarch began as a response to job insecurity? It began as a refusal to give anyone else power over my future, I clarified. But it evolved quickly into something more meaningful when I realized there were thousands of businesses out there one bad quarter away from collapse. Businesses with solid foundations but flawed execution. Places where people like me could lose their jobs not because they failed, but because someone at the top made poor decisions. Simone nodded, making notes despite the recorder. "And that became your niche. saving troubled companies rather than simply advising successful ones. Exactly. Most consulting firms want to attach themselves to already thriving businesses. It's easier, more prestigious. But I saw opportunity in the struggling ones. Companies with good products or services but operational inefficiencies, financial mismanagement, or outdated strategies. A riskier approach, she observed. Higher risk, higher reward. I smiled, both financially and in terms of impact. When you help turn around a failing company, you're not just increasing profit margins. You're saving jobs, preserving institutional knowledge, keeping vital products and services in the marketplace. The interview continued for over an hour. As Simone asked about specific client successes, my management philosophy, and Monarch's unconventional fee structure, we took minimal upfront payment but a percentage of improved profitability over 2 years, aligning our success directly with our clients. Then she shifted to more personal territory. There's surprisingly little public information about you personally, despite Monarch's growing profile. Was that a deliberate choice? I tensed slightly, but maintained my composed exterior. It was strategic initially. When you're young, female, and building a financial consulting firm, you face certain prejudices. Keeping the focus on the company rather than its founder helped bypass some of those barriers. And now? Monarch is established, respected. Yet you've maintained a remarkably low profile until this interview. This was the opening I'd been both expecting and dreading, the question that bridged my professional accomplishments with my personal motivations. I could give the sanitized version, focus solely on business strategy, but something in Simone's direct gaze made me opt for honesty. Now it's about proving something, I admitted. Not to clients or competitors, but to myself. And perhaps to my family. Simone leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. Your family doesn't know about your success? They know I work in business, but they believe I've struggled professionally, that I bounce between temporary administrative jobs because I can't secure anything permanent. I paused, surprised by my own candor. They have no idea I founded and run Monarch. Her eyebrows rose. That's unusual. May I ask why? I glanced out the window at the city spread below us, gathering my thoughts. My father has certain definitions of success: prestigious degrees, traditional career paths, linear progression. When I chose a different route, he made it clear he expected me to fail. And rather than correct his misconception as you succeeded, you let him continue believing it? At first, it was because Monarch was too new, too fragile. I couldn't bear his skepticism while I was still proving the concept. I turned back to face her. Later, when we started succeeding, it became a kind of test. How far could I go while they remained oblivious? How successful would I need to be before revealing the truth would be undeniable, even to my most critical detractors? And have you reached that point now? I smiled. The annual family reunion is in 2 weeks. This article will be published just before then. So I suppose we're about to find out. Simone's eyes lit with journalistic instinct. That timing isn't coincidental, I take it. Let's call it strategic alignment of personal and professional milestones. She chuckled. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be just another business profile. There's a fascinating psychological dimension to your story, Eleanor. The hidden achiever finally stepping into the light. The remainder of the interview focused on future plans for Monarch, our expansion into Asian markets, the new division focused on sustainability transformations, our proprietary analytics platform that could predict business failure points with remarkable accuracy. As we concluded, Simone closed her notebook and turned off the recorder. Thank you for your time and your candor. This will make a compelling feature. When will it run? Digital release in 10 days, as we discussed. Print 3 days after that. We'll send you the final draft for fact-checking before publication. After she left, I remained in the conference room, staring out at the city. The interview had forced me to articulate things I'd kept buried beneath spreadsheets and strategy documents. The personal wounds that had fueled my professional drive. The complicated relationship between achievement and validation. Julian entered quietly, setting a cup of tea on the table beside me. How did it go? Well, I think I was more forthcoming than I'd planned. He nodded approvingly. Truth makes for a better story than sanitized corporate narratives. Did you mention the reunion? Yes, it's going to be part of the angle. I turned to face him. Is that a mistake, Julian? Using a business profile to orchestrate a personal revelation? He considered this thoughtfully. In most cases, I'd advise against it. But your story is unique. Your business success is inextricably linked to your personal journey. The decades of underestimation became fuel for your ambition. That's not just compelling, it's inspirational. Or it's petty, I countered, orchestrating a grand reveal to prove my father wrong. If that were your only motivation, perhaps. But you built Monarch to help struggling businesses, to save jobs, to create value. The fact that it will also silence your critics is simply a satisfying bonus. His eyes twinkled with understated humor. My phone buzzed with a notification. The quarterly meeting with our executive team would begin in 15 minutes. I gathered my materials, pushing thoughts of the reunion temporarily aside. Whatever revelations awaited my family, they would have to wait. Today belonged to Monarch. The days that followed passed in a blur of activity. I reviewed the Forbes article draft, approving it with minimal changes. I finalized our expansion strategy for the European market. I met with potential investors, negotiated a new office lease in Singapore, and interviewed candidates for our growing sustainability division. Through it all, the family reunion loomed on the horizon. Both destination and reckoning. My father called twice more, leaving increasingly irritated messages about my childish behavior at the dinner and my failure to return his calls. I let them go to voicemail, focusing instead on preparation. Julian coordinated the logistics. With his usual efficiency, the Rolls-Royce Phantom would be delivered the morning of the reunion, complete with a professional chauffeur in formal attire. My stylist selected an outfit that balanced sophistication with understated luxury. A silk Dior dress in deep emerald that complemented my eyes, paired with discreet diamond earrings, and my grandmother's vintage Cartier watch, restored and polished to perfection. The evening before the Forbes article was scheduled to be released, Catherine called. I answered, steeling myself for another plea to contact our father. Eleanor, are you sitting down? Her voice vibrated with unusual energy. Yes, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. But I just got off the phone with Trevor Wilson. We serve on the hospital board together. He mentioned he'd heard rumors about a major profile coming out tomorrow in Forbes. A feature on some brilliant entrepreneur who saved his brother-in-law's manufacturing company from bankruptcy last year. My heart skipped. Trevor Wilson's brother-in-law owned Meridian Manufacturing, one of Monarch's most successful client transformations. We'd reverse their declining revenues and position them for acquisition by a larger conglomerate, saving over 300 jobs in the process. Did he mention the entrepreneur by name? I asked carefully. No, just that it was someone local, who'd built some kind of consulting empire right under everyone's noses. But then he said something about the Archer building downtown, and I remembered you mentioning you had a meeting there a few months ago. I remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Eleanor, she said slowly, is there something you haven't been telling us? The moment stretched between us, the perfect opportunity to offer a preview, to let at least one family member into my confidence before the public reveal. But something held me back. Perhaps it was the years of conditioning, of compartmentalizing, my life into what my family saw and what was real. Perhaps it was the desire to have them all discover the truth simultaneously, with no advance warning to dull the impact. "Let's talk at the reunion," I said finally. "I think you'll find it illuminating," she sighed, frustrated but intrigued. "You're being deliberately cryptic. That's not like you." I almost laughed at the irony. Being cryptic about my achievements had been precisely like me for years now. My entire family had no idea who I truly was, what drove me, what I'd built, what I was capable of. But that was about to change. The morning the Forbes article went live, I woke before dawn. I brewed a cup of strong coffee and opened my laptop, heart pounding as I navigated to the Forbes website. There it was, featured prominently on the homepage. The Invisible Empire: How Eleanor Reed Built a $30 million consulting firm without anyone noticing. The accompanying photo showed me standing in Monarch's offices, the city skyline behind me. Expression confident but approachable. The subtitle read, "Meet the stealth CEO who specialized in saving failing businesses while keeping her own success a secret, until now." I read through the article with mounting emotion. Simone had captured not just the facts of Monarch's growth, but the human story behind it. The laid-off consultant who transformed rejection into opportunity, who built a business model around saving other businesses, who measured success not just in profits but in jobs preserved and livelihoods protected. She'd been tasteful about the family elements, not naming names, but noting that Reed's unconventional path to success ran counter to family expectations, leading to the unusual circumstance where her closest relatives remained unaware of her achievements until this publication. By 8 a.m., my phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. LinkedIn connection requests from industry leaders who had previously ignored my outreach. Emails from potential clients and investors. Text messages from the few friends who knew about Monarch, congratulating me on going public at last. But nothing from my family. Not yet. Julian called at 9:15. "The article is making quite a splash. CNBC wants you on tomorrow. Bloomberg called twice already. And the owner of the Archer building sent champagne to the office with a note saying he's proud to have Monarch as a tenant." "Any word from—" I left the question unfinished. "Your family?" "Not that I'm aware of." His tone softened. "Perhaps they haven't seen it yet. The print edition won't be available until the reunion." "Right," I agreed, pushing aside a flicker of disappointment. What had I expected? That my father would read a business publication he never followed, immediately, recognize me and call with effusive apologies for years of underestimation? The reality, I knew, would be far more complicated. And it would begin tomorrow at the Stevenson family reunion, held annually at my great-uncle's sprawling estate in the countryside. The event typically drew 60 to 70 family members, from immediate relatives to distant cousins, all of whom had heard my father's dismissive comments about his underachieving youngest daughter over the years. I spent the day at the office, deliberately immersing myself in work rather than constantly checking for family reactions. We had a major client presentation that required finalization, contract negotiations for our Singapore office lease, and interviews scheduled for the sustainability division. Normal business operations provided a welcome distraction from the anticipation of tomorrow's revelation. At 7 p.m., as I was reviewing the final changes to our client presentation, Julian appeared in my office doorway. "Enough," he said firmly. "You've been at it for 12 hours. The reunion is tomorrow, and you need rest." I sighed, acknowledging he was right. "Just one more hour." "No. Car's waiting downstairs. I've taken the liberty of ordering dinner to be delivered to your loft." "Go home, Eleanor. Tomorrow is the culmination of years of work, both professional and personal. You should face it well-rested." I smiled gratefully. Julian was right, as usual. Whatever happened tomorrow, however my family reacted, would be a turning point. After, Years of hiding my success, of compartmentalizing my life, of being underestimated and dismissed, I was finally stepping fully into the light. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the devastation of being laid off to the tenuous early days of Monarch. From my father's certainty that I would fail to the quiet satisfaction of proving him wrong without his knowledge. From accepting the label of family failure to redefining success entirely on my own terms. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, validation or further rejection, understanding or continued dismissal. But regardless of my family's reaction, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had built something meaningful, something that had helped countless people keep their jobs and livelihoods, something that reflected my values and vision. And nothing, not even my father's judgment, could take that away. The morning of the Stevenson family reunion dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows and casting golden patterns across the floor. I stood before my full-length mirror, studying my reflection critically. The emerald Dior dress fit perfectly, accentuating my figure without being ostentatious. My hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, had been professionally styled into soft waves that framed my face. The diamond earrings caught the light with subtle brilliance, and my grandmother's vintage Cartier watch, the only family heirloom I'd ever asked for, gleamed on my wrist. The woman in the mirror looked confident, successful, powerful. She looked nothing like the family failure. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Car will arrive in 30 minutes. Driver's name is Thomas. Copies of Forbes in the rear compartment as requested. I sent a quick acknowledgement, then returned to my preparations. This wasn't simply about looking the part. It was about embodying the truth I'd hidden for so long. Today, the masks would fall away. Today, I would finally be whole. The intercom buzzed precisely 30 minutes later. "Ms. Reed, your car is ready," announced my building's doorman. I took a deep breath, gathered my clutch, and headed for the elevator. In the lobby, several residents glanced my way with appreciative nods. Mrs. Henley, the retired literature professor from the 12th floor, did a double take. "Eleanor? My goodness, you look stunning, dear." "Thank you," I smiled. "Special family event today?" "Well, whoever they are, they're in for a treat." Her eyes twinkled with grandmotherly approval. If only she knew. Outside, the Rolls-Royce Phantom gleamed in the morning sunlight, its iconic spirit of ecstasy ornament catching the light. Thomas, the chauffeur, stood at attention beside the rear door, impeccable in his formal uniform. He was older than I'd expected, perhaps in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the dignified bearing of someone who had served the wealthy for decades. "Good morning, Ms. Reed," he greeted me, opening the door with practiced precision. "It's an honor to drive you today." "Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate your assistance." The interior of the Phantom was a masterpiece of luxury. Buttery soft leather seats, handcrafted wood paneling, and every modern convenience discreetly integrated into the classic design. On the seat beside me lay 3 copies of Forbes magazine, the cover featuring my portrait and the bold headline announcing Monarch's success. I picked one up, still somewhat disoriented by seeing my own face staring back from such a prestigious publication. After years of intentional invisibility, the exposure felt both exhilarating and slightly terrifying. "To the Stevenson estate." "Ms. Reed?" Thomas confirmed as he settled into the driver's seat. "Yes, please, it's about an hour north." As we pulled away from my building, I checked my phone. Still no messages from my family about the article. Either they truly hadn't seen it yet, or they were waiting to confront me in person. Given my father's temperament, the latter seemed more likely. The countryside gradually replaced city buildings. As we drove north, manicured lawns giving way to open fields and wooded areas. The Stevenson estate had been in my mother's family for generations, a sprawling property centered around a Victorian mansion that had been modernized over the years, while maintaining its historic character. Great-Uncle Richard, my mother's uncle, and the family patriarch since my grandfather's passing, still lived there with his second wife, hosting the annual reunion with old money graciousness that somehow never extended to accepting my career choices. At 92, he remained sharp as ever, with firm opinions about proper family traditions and acceptable paths to success. As we approached the estate's long tree-lined driveway, I felt my pulse quicken. Through the tinted windows, I could already see cars parked along the circular drive and on the expansive lawn, luxury sedans and high-end SUVs that showcased the Stevenson family's prosperity. "We've arrived, Ms. Reed," Thomas announced as the mansion came fully into view. "Would you like me to drop you at the main entrance or proceed to the parking area?" I smiled, appreciating the question. "The main entrance, please, Thomas. And then, if you could wait nearby? I may need to depart earlier than planned, depending on how things unfold." "Of course, ma'am." The Rolls-Royce glided to a smooth stop before the grand front steps of the mansion. Through the windshield, I could see several family members, lingering on the wide front porch, drinks in hand. A few had already noticed the arrival of the luxury vehicle, their curious gazes trying to penetrate the tinted windows. "Ready when you are, Ms. Reed," Thomas said quietly. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and nodded. "Thank you, Thomas." He exited the driver's side with formal precision, walked around to my door, and opened it with a small bow. As I emerged from the car, clutch in one hand and a copy of Forbes in the other, the reactions on the porch were immediate and varied. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Drinks paused halfway to lips. Eyes widened in confusion, then recognition. My second. Cousin Philip actually dropped his champagne flute. "Is that Eleanor?" I heard someone whisper loudly. I smiled at Thomas. "I'll text you if I need anything." "Thank you." "My pleasure, Ms. Reed. I'll remain nearby." He bowed slightly again, closed the door, and returned to the driver's seat with practiced elegance. The Rolls-Royce retreated to a discreet distance as I ascended the stone steps to the porch, conscious of every eye upon me. My Aunt Vivian recovered first, rushing forward with her usual effusive energy. "Eleanor, darling, look at you." She air-kissed both my cheeks, then pulled back to examine my transformation. "That dress is divine." "Dior?" "Yes," I confirmed. Simply. "And was that a Rolls we just saw?" Uncle George asked, peering over his glasses at the retreating vehicle. "A Phantom, yes." I maintained my composure, determined not to seem defensive or boastful. This wasn't about flaunting wealth. It was about revealing truth. Great-Uncle Richard appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on his ebony walking stick. At 92, he remained imposing, tall, thin, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. "Well, well," he said, his aristocratic voice carrying across the suddenly quiet porch. "Eleanor has decided to make an entrance this year. Come here, child. Let me look at you." I crossed to him, accepting his dry kiss on my cheek with appropriate deference. Despite his occasionally antiquated views, I'd always respected Great-Uncle Richard's intelligence and directness. "You seem different," he observed, studying me with those penetrating eyes. "Something's changed." "Several things, actually," I replied. "But perhaps we should discuss that inside. I wouldn't want to create a scene." His lips twitched with the ghost of a smile. Rather late for that concern, I'd say. The Rolls-Royce saw to that. He gestured toward the entrance. "Nevertheless, propriety demands we continue this discussion in private. Your father is in the library with Catherine and Morgan." Of course he was. The library had always been my father's preferred domain at family gatherings, a place where he could hold court surrounded by leather-bound books that signaled intellect and tradition. As we entered the mansion's grand foyer, more relatives turned to stare. Second cousins I saw only at these annual gatherings. My mother's younger sister and her husband from Boston. Distant relatives whose exact connection to the family tree remained vague. All of them had heard my father's dismissive comments about me over the years. All of them had formed impressions based on his narrative of my supposed failures. Great-Uncle Richard led the way to the library, his cane tapping rhythmically against the hardwood floors. I followed, maintaining my composure despite the whispers that trailed in our wake. Outside the heavy oak doors, he paused. "Whatever revelation you're about to deliver," he said quietly, "remember that family remains family, even when they disappoint us, or we disappoint them." With that enigmatic comment, he pushed open the doors and announced with unnecessary volume, "Look who's arrived in grand style." The library fell silent as all eyes turned toward me. My father stood by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand, frowning at the interruption. Catherine and Morgan sat in adjacent armchairs, their husbands hovering nearby. Morgan's children were absent, likely dispatched to play with the other family youngsters in the game room. "Eleanor," my father acknowledged stiffly. His eyes narrowed as he took in my appearance. "You're overdressed for a family gathering?" I smiled. "Hello, Dad. Catherine, Morgan. Lovely to see you all." Catherine rose immediately, crossing to embrace me. "You look incredible," she whispered in my ear. "Is this what you've been hiding?" "Part of it," I whispered back. Morgan remained seated, her usual poise momentarily abandoned as she openly stared at my transformation. "What is happening right now?" she demanded, looking between me and our father. "And why did Uncle Richard say you arrived in grand style?" Great-Uncle Richard chuckled, settling into his favorite leather armchair with a satisfied expression. "Your sister arrived in a Rolls-Royce, complete with uniformed chauffeur. Quite the departure from her usual. What was it last year? A Honda with a dented door?" Robert nearly choked on his drink. "A Rolls? What, did you win the lottery?" "Not exactly," I replied calmly. I moved to the center of the room, consciously claiming the space in a way I never had before at family gatherings. "I've been wanting to share some news with you all." "If this is about that project you mentioned at dinner," my father began dismissively, "we hardly need a theatrical entrance to—" "Actually, Dad," I interrupted gently but firmly, "I think you'll find this worth hearing." I placed the Forbes magazine on the mahogany coffee table, my cover photo, facing upward. "This was published yesterday." For a moment, no one moved. Then Catherine leaned forward, brows furrowing as she read the headline aloud. "The Invisible Empire: How Eleanor Reed Built a $30 million Consulting Firm Without Anyone Noticing." "Wait, this is you?" I nodded. "Yes, I'm the founder and CEO of Monarch Financial Solutions. We specialize in corporate turnarounds and financial restructuring for struggling businesses." The silence that followed was deafening. Morgan snatched up the magazine, flipping to the feature article inside with Robert reading over her shoulder. Catherine looked between the magazine and me, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. Michael, her husband, let out a low whistle. My father hadn't moved, hadn't reached for the magazine. He simply stared at me, his expression unreadable. 4 years ago, I continued, addressing the room but keeping my eyes on him, I was laid off from Preston Consulting. During company downsizing? When I called you for support, Dad, you told me it was expected, that I should have chosen a more stable career path, like law or medicine. He remained silent, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Instead of giving up, I saw an opportunity. I launched Monarch with my savings and a clear vision to save struggling companies by identifying operational inefficiencies and implementing targeted solutions. Our first client was Everton Manufacturing. You might remember them from the news a few years ago. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, about to lay off 300 employees. After working with Monarch, they returned to profitability within 6 months. Wait, Robert interjected, looking up from the article. You're that Eleanor Reed? The one who saved Meridian Manufacturing last year? I nodded. Among others, we've worked with over 40 companies in the past 4 years, saving approximately 12,000 jobs and returning nearly $1 billion to the economy through revitalized businesses. Morgan's perfect composure had completely abandoned her. But you've been working temp jobs, administrative positions. We all knew that. How could you possibly— I never actually said I was working temp jobs, I corrected gently. You all assumed that, and I simply didn't correct you. Those positions were strategic, ways to gain insider knowledge of struggling companies before approaching them as a consultant. But your apartment, Catherine said, that tiny one-bedroom in Westridge, and your car. Maintained for appearances, I admitted. I actually live in a penthouse loft downtown. The building that houses Monarch's headquarters, in fact. Great Uncle Richard's laugh suddenly filled the room, a genuine, delighted sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Magnificent. He declared, slapping his knee. Absolutely magnificent deception. All these years we thought you were floundering, and you were building an empire right under our noses. My father finally spoke, his voice tight with restrained emotion. Why the secrecy, Eleanor? Why let us believe you were failing when you were succeeding? What possible purpose could that serve except to humiliate us now? The question cut to the heart of everything. The years of hiding, of compartmentalizing, of letting myself be underestimated. When I started Monarch, I said carefully, it was fragile, new, unproven. Your skepticism about my choices was so consistent, so unwavering, that I couldn't bear to have it directed at my fledgling company. I needed to protect Monarch while it grew, and perhaps I needed to protect myself too. Protect yourself from what? He demanded. From your family's support? I met his gaze directly. From your doubt, Dad. From the certainty with which you've always predicted my failure. From comments like the family failure that somehow became how you defined me to others. He flinched visibly at the direct reference. Emma's innocent. Repetition of his words had clearly hit home. As Monarch grew more successful, I continued, the secrecy became, I don't know, a test, perhaps. How far could I go before you would see me, really see me, for who I am and what I'm capable of? But you never looked beyond what you expected to see. Catherine reached for my hand, squeezing it supportively. I should have seen it. Those business trips you mentioned. The way you always seemed to know industry news before anyone else. The confidence that sometimes slipped through despite your modest appearance. Morgan was still staring at the magazine, rereading passages as if searching for a hidden explanation. $30 million valuation, she murmured. International expansion, proprietary analytics platform. She looked up at me with something approaching. Aw. Ellie, this is extraordinary. Robert and Michael exchanged glances, clearly recalibrating their entire perception of their sister-in-law. Great Uncle Richard continued to chuckle occasionally, clearly delighted by the dramatic reveal. But my father remained silent, his expression now troubled as he finally picked up the magazine and began reading the article more carefully. I never set out to embarrass anyone, I said, addressing him directly. That wasn't the point of this revelation, but I am done hiding who I am and what I've built. I'm done accepting the label of family failure when the reality is so different. Does this article mention us? He asked suddenly, looking up from the pages. Does it mention how your family underestimated you? Simone was discreet, I assured him. She notes that my family was unaware of my success until now, but she doesn't name names or quote anyone. This isn't about public embarrassment. Dad, it's about truth. He set the magazine down, then crossed to the window overlooking the estate grounds. We could all see the Rolls-Royce parked at a discreet distance, Thomas standing at attention beside it. "Did you really need the chauffeur?" "The luxury car?" he asked quietly. "Was that necessary to make your point?" "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. But after years of deliberately downplaying my success, driving an old car, wearing modest clothes, maintaining that small apartment, I wanted the external reality to finally match the truth. Just once, I wanted to arrive as who I truly am, not who you all thought I was. He turned from the window, his expression softening slightly. "And who are you, Eleanor? Beyond the company valuation and the fancy car?" The question surprised me, deeper and more genuine than I'd expected. From him. "I'm someone who finds meaning in saving what others would discard," I said after a moment. "Someone who sees potential where others see only failure. Someone who values substance over appearance and results over credentials." I paused. Someone who spent far too long seeking approval from people who weren't looking closely enough to give it. The library door opened then, and Aunt Vivian poked her head in. "Richard, everyone's gathered for the family photo and—" "Oh." She glanced around, sensing the tension. "Should I come back later?" Great Uncle Richard rose with surprising agility for his age. "Nonsense, Vivian. We're coming now. A family photo seems particularly appropriate today, as we've just discovered that Eleanor has been keeping quite extraordinary secrets from us all." He winked at me. Secrets that would have made her grandmother immensely proud, I might add. As the others filed out, my father remained by the window and I lingered, waiting. We needed to finish this conversation, to find some resolution, however tenuous. "I read everything you've ever written," he said suddenly, still looking out. "At the grounds. Every school essay, every college paper, every briefing you prepared at that first consulting job." I blinked in surprise. "You did?" He nodded, finally turning to face me. "I've kept it all, in the bottom drawer of my desk. I knew you had potential, Eleanor, extraordinary potential. That's why I pushed so hard, why I was so critical." "That's not how it felt," I said softly. "It felt like no matter what I achieved, it was never enough. Never the right kind of success." "Because I wanted you to be exceptional," he replied. "Not just good. Not just comfortable. Exceptional. Your sisters followed conventional paths to conventional success. But you were always different. I thought you needed pushing to reach your full capability." I shook my head slowly. What I needed was support, Dad. Belief. Someone who saw my different approach as a strength, not a flaw. "And clearly," he gestured toward the magazine, "you found that somewhere else." "I found it in myself," I corrected gently, "and in mentors who recognized my value without trying to reshape me into someone else's image of success." He was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a small, rueful thing, but genuine. "You know, you remind me of your mother. She was stubborn too, determined to prove everyone wrong." The comparison to my mother, so rare from him, caught me off guard. "I'll take that as a compliment." "As you should." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I don't know if I can be the kind of father you needed, Eleanor, but I'm proud of what you've built, even if I don't entirely understand it." It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of misunderstanding couldn't be resolved in a single conversation. But it was an opening, a crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. "Maybe you could visit Monarch sometime," I offered. "See what we actually do." He nodded slowly. "I'd like that." As we walked together toward the garden where the family was gathering for photos, Great Uncle Richard fell into step beside me, his cane tapping rhythmically. "Quite the revelation, my dear," he murmured. You've certainly given the family something to discuss for years to come. I smiled. That wasn't my intention. Perhaps not, but it's a delightful side effect. He paused, then added, Your grandmother would indeed have been proud. She always said you had a spark the others lacked. She believed in me, I said simply, when no one else did. And now? He asked, gesturing toward the assembled family members, who were watching our approach with undisguised curiosity. Now that they all know the truth? I considered the question as we crossed the manicured lawn. Morgan was already positioning her family for maximum advantage in the photo. Catherine was watching me with newfound respect. My father walked beside me, chastened but thoughtful. Cousins and aunts and uncles whispered amongst themselves, reconstructing their mental image of poor Eleanor in real time. Now, I said, finally, I don't need their belief anymore. I've proven what I needed to prove, mostly to myself. Great-Uncle Richard nodded approvingly. The best revenge is not just success, my dear. It's success on your own terms. As the family photographer arranged us in carefully orchestrated rows, I found myself in the center of the frame for the first time, no longer relegated to the edges of the family portrait. And as the camera flashed, capturing this moment of transformation, I realized that the greatest achievement wasn't building a successful company or proving my critics wrong. It was finally stepping fully into who I was meant to be all along, without apology or pretense. The family failure, it turned out, had never existed at all. The weeks following the family reunion unfolded in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The Forbes article generated substantial interest in Monarch, bringing a flood of new client inquiries, investment opportunities, and speaking invitations. My calendar filled with meetings and interviews as the business world suddenly discovered the stealth CEO who had built a multi-million-dollar empire while flying under the radar. But the most surprising developments came from within my family. Catherine called the day after the reunion, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and lingering disbelief. I still can't believe you kept this secret for so long, she said. How did you manage it? Didn't you want to just tell someone? Anyone? I settled into my office chair, looking out at the city skyline. There were moments when I nearly did, especially with you. But once the pattern was established, once I'd committed to the separation between my personal and professional lives, it became easier to maintain than to disrupt. Well, it's disrupted now, she laughed. Dad's been uncharacteristically quiet since the reunion. I think you genuinely shocked him. That wasn't my primary goal, I said, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. Part of me had wanted him to see just how thoroughly he had misjudged me. Maybe not primary, but it was on the list, Catherine teased. Anyway, I'm calling because I wanted to ask you something. The Pediatric Center is holding a fundraising gala next month for our new children's cancer wing. Would Monarch consider being a sponsor? I heard the hesitation in her voice, the uncertainty about mixing our personal relationship with business now that my professional identity was revealed. In the past, she would never have considered asking me for a donation, assuming I couldn't afford it. Of course, I responded without hesitation. Send me the details, and I'll have Julian coordinate with your team. Monarch would be honored to support the Pediatric Center. Her relief was palpable. Thank you, Ellie. And there's one more thing. Would you be willing to speak at the gala? Your story, building something meaningful from setbacks, seeing potential where others don't, it resonates with our mission. Many of our patients and their families need exactly that kind of inspiration. The request touched me unexpectedly. For years, Catherine had seen me through our father's lens, the underachieving sister who couldn't find her place. Now she was asking me to speak as someone whose journey might inspire others. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. After we hung up, I sat contemplating how quickly perceptions could shift. 4 weeks ago, Catherine would never have considered me a potential speaker or donor. My father had dismissed me as a perpetual disappointment. Morgan had pitied my supposed instability. Now, they were recalibrating not just their understanding of my professional accomplishments, but their entire perception of who I was as a person. Julian entered with a stack of documents requiring my signature, contracts for the Singapore office lease, approval forms for new hires in our European division, and our quarterly financial statements. "Ms. Reed, your 11 o'clock has arrived early. Mr. Stevenson is waiting in the main conference room. I've provided coffee and arranged for lunch to be delivered at 12:30. I froze, pen hovering over the signature line. "Mr. Stevenson is here? Already?" Julian's expression betrayed nothing, but I detected a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. He arrived 15 minutes ago. Quite punctual." My father had called 3 days after the reunion, asking if he could visit Monarch's offices to better understand what you've built. I'd agreed, somewhat warily, scheduling a meeting for today. But I'd expected him to be fashionably late, as was his habit for anything involving me. "How does he seem?" I asked, curious about Julian's assessment. "Nervous," Julian replied candidly, "and determined to hide it. He's examined every award in the lobby display case twice and straightened his tie 4 times in the last 10 minutes. The image of my perpetually confident father nervously waiting in my conference room was so incongruous that I almost laughed. Instead, I signed the remaining documents and rose from my desk. "I'll meet him now. Please make sure we're not disturbed unless it's absolutely necessary." "Of course." Julian hesitated, then added, "If I may, Ms. Reed. This meeting represents a significant step in your personal journey. Whatever transpires, remember that your achievements stand independent of his assessment." I smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Julian. I'll remember that." The walk to the conference room gave me time to compose myself. This meeting wasn't about seeking validation or forcing an apology. It was about beginning a new chapter in our relationship, one based on truth rather than misconception. My father stood as I entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He wore a charcoal suit with his customary perfection, but Julian was right. There was an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his bearing. "Eleanor." He greeted me, extending his hand formally as if meeting a business associate rather than his daughter. I took his hand briefly, then gestured to the seats. "Thank you for coming, Dad. I'm glad you wanted to see Monarch." He sat, glancing around the sleek conference room with its state-of-the-art technology and panoramic city views. "Impressive facilities. How long have you been in this building?" "Almost 2 years now. We started in a much smaller space, just me and a part-time assistant in a converted storage room." He nodded, absorbing this. "And you live here too? In the building?" "The top 2 floors are residential penthouses. I purchased one when we moved the headquarters here. It made sense logistically, given my work hours." An awkward silence fell between us. My father had never struggled with conversation. He was known for his articulate opinions on everything from politics to wine vintages. But now he seemed at a loss, perhaps realizing that his usual patterns of interaction with me, advice, criticism, concern, no longer applied. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been reading about your company. Not just the Forbes piece, but everything I could find. Industry analyses, client testimonials, financial projections. And?" I prompted when he paused. "And it's remarkable, Eleanor. Truly remarkable." The admission seemed to cost him something. "Your business model. Tying your fees to measurable improvements rather than charging up front regardless of results. It's innovative. Ethical even. And apparently highly effective." I hadn't expected such a thorough assessment or such genuine praise. Thank you. We believe in aligning our interests directly with our clients. If they don't succeed, neither do we. It's brilliant, he said simply. High risk, certainly, but brilliant. Another silence fell, less awkward this time. I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. You're wondering why I didn't tell you sooner. He sighed, a heavy sound that carried decades of complicated emotions. Among other things, yes. I've thought about that a lot since the reunion, I admitted. And while part of it was protecting Monarch in its early stages from your skepticism, I think the deeper truth is that I needed to prove something to myself first. I needed to know I could succeed without your approval, or anyone else's. His eyebrows rose slightly. And did you? Prove it to yourself? Yes, I said without hesitation. Building Monarch taught me to trust my own judgment, to value my unique perspective. The financial success is gratifying, of course, but the real achievement was learning to believe in myself even when, especially when, others didn't. My father looked down at his hands, unusually contemplative. You know, Eleanor, when you were born, you were different from your sisters from the very beginning. Morgan and Catherine were predictable. They cried when they were hungry or tired. They hit all their developmental milestones right on schedule. They responded to the world in ways the parenting books said they would. I listened, surprised by this glimpse into my infancy. But you, he continued, you were a mystery. You rarely cried, even when you must have been uncomfortable. You watched everything with these intense eyes, like you were cataloging the world. You didn't walk until nearly 18 months, well past when the doctors said you should. But when you finally did, you didn't toddle like most babies. You stood up and walked across the room with perfect balance, as if you'd been practicing in secret. I'd never heard this story before. Mom never mentioned that. She understood you better than I did, he admitted. She said you weren't delayed. You were deliberate. That you wouldn't do anything until you were absolutely certain you could do it perfectly. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I think that's why I pushed you so hard, Eleanor. Because I saw this extraordinary potential, this unique way of approaching the world, and I was terrified you'd hold yourself back waiting for perfection instead of taking necessary risks. The revelation stunned me. All those years of criticism, of impossible standards, of constantly moving goalposts, he had seen them as pushing me toward my potential, not holding me back from it. That's not how it felt, I said quietly. It felt like nothing I did was ever enough, that you were perpetually disappointed in me for not being more like Morgan and Catherine. He winced. I can see how it would have seemed that way. I was harder on you than on them, but not because I thought less of you, because I thought you were capable of more. I absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with my lifetime of experiences. Even when I was working those supposedly temporary jobs, even when you called me the family failure, he had the grace to look genuinely ashamed. That comment was inexcusable, regardless of context. But yes, even then, I was frustrated because I believed you could do so much more. I just couldn't understand why you seemed content with positions so far below your capabilities. Because they weren't my real work, I pointed out. They were strategic reconnaissance for Monarch. But you never asked. You just assumed. You're right, he acknowledged. I saw what I expected to see. We all did. We sat in silence for a moment, each processing this shift in understanding. Outside the windows, the city continued its perpetual motion, oblivious to our personal reckonings. Would you like a tour of the office? I offered finally. Meet some of the team? He nodded, seeming relieved by the change of subject. I'd like that very much. For the next hour, I guided him through Monarch's headquarters, introducing him to key team members and explaining our operations. He asked thoughtful questions, engaged respectfully with my employees, and displayed genuine interest in the business I'd built. This wasn't the dismissive father I'd grown accustomed to. This was someone seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. As we returned to the conference room where lunch had been set out, he paused by the wall, displaying Monarch's core values, elegantly printed on brushed metal plaques: integrity, innovation, impact. These aren't just corporate buzzwords for you, are they? He observed. They're personal principles. Yes, I confirmed. Everything Monarch does flows from these values. We've turned down lucrative clients whose goals didn't align with our commitment to ethical business practices. We've walked away from opportunities that would have boosted our bottom line but compromised our principles. He studied me with new eyes. That takes courage. Real courage. Coming from my father, a man who valued strength above almost all other qualities, this was high praise indeed. Over lunch, our conversation shifted to the future, Monarch's expansion plans, new market sectors we were targeting, innovative services we were developing. He listened attentively, occasionally offering insights from his own business experience that were surprisingly relevant. "I have a proposition for you," he said as we finished eating. "The legal firm I've been with for 40 years represents several companies that might benefit from Monarch's services. Would you be open to an introduction?" The offer caught me off guard. My father had never volunteered to connect me professionally with his extensive network before. It represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed me, from disappointing daughter to respected peer. "I would appreciate that," I said carefully, "provided they're genuinely good fits for our approach. Monarch is selective about the clients we take on." He smiled, a real smile, not the tight, disapproving expression I was accustomed to receiving. "Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less. I'll have my assistant coordinate with Julian, was it? To arrange appropriate introductions." As our meeting concluded and I walked him to the elevator, I sensed he had more to say. He hesitated as the doors opened, then turned to face me fully. "I owe you an apology, Eleanor, not just for underestimating you, but for making you feel that you needed to hide your success from your own family. No child should feel that their achievements would be dismissed rather than celebrated." The simple acknowledgement, delivered without qualifications or excuses, caught me completely unprepared. "Thank you," I managed, my throat suddenly tight, with unexpected emotion. "That means a lot." He nodded once, then entered the elevator. As the doors began to close, he added, "I'm proud of you, Eleanor, not because of what you've built, though that is remarkable, but because of how you built it, with integrity, determination, and on your own terms. Your mother would have been proud too." The doors closed before I could respond, leaving me standing in the lobby with those words echoing in my mind. Your mother would have been proud too. Of all the reactions I had anticipated to my revelation, this genuine expression of respect and pride had seemed the least likely. I returned to my office to find Julian waiting with my afternoon schedule. "How did it go?" he inquired, his British reserve not quite concealing his concern. "Surprisingly well," I admitted. "Better than I expected. He wants to introduce Monarch to some of his legal firm's clients." Julian's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a turnaround. From the man who called you the family failure." "People can change when confronted with undeniable truth," I observed. "Or at least they can change how they see others, even if their fundamental nature remains the same." "Indeed," Julian Tieski agreed. "And speaking of undeniable truths, CNBC has requested an interview for their Visionary Women in Business segment. They were quite persistent. I considered this. For years, I deliberately avoided media attention, concerned that public recognition might reach my family before I was ready for them to know the truth. Now that constraint was gone, I could step fully into the public role of Monarch's founder and CEO. Schedule it, I decided, and the Bloomberg request too. It's time for Monarch to have a public face. Very good. Julian made a note in his tablet. And on a personal note, if I may, Ms. Catherine called while you were with your father. She asked if you might join her for dinner this evening. She mentioned something about making up for lost time. I smiled at that. Catherine and I had been close as children but had drifted apart as adults, separated as much by my secrecy as by her alignment with our father's expectations. Perhaps now we could rebuild that connection on more authentic terms. Tell her I'd love to, I said. Suggest Marcello's at 7:30. As Julian departed, I turned to the window, gazing out at the city that had witnessed my transformation from underestimated daughter to respected CEO. The journey hadn't been easy, and the revelation hadn't resolved everything. Decades of family dynamics couldn't be untangled in a single dramatic moment. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel divided between who my family thought I was and who I truly was. The masks had fallen away, allowing me to stand fully in my truth, with all its complexity and achievement. My phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. Hate to admit it, but I've been reading about your company all week and it's actually brilliant. Any chance you'd come talk to my firm's partners? We could use some of that innovation over here. I smiled at the grudging admiration in her message. Morgan had always been the competitive one, the sister determined to be first and best at everything. For her to acknowledge my success, even partially, represented a significant concession. Happy to, if you're serious, I replied. Let me know. When? Her response came quickly. Dead serious. Partners meeting next Thursday. Robert's already told everyone his sister-in-law is that Eleanor Reed from Forbes. Don't make me look bad. I laughed aloud at that. Some things never changed. Morgan would always frame things in terms of her own reputation, but the acknowledgement was real, and the opportunity to share Monarch's approach with her prestigious law firm was genuinely appealing. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my office, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few short weeks. The burden of secrecy had lifted. My family was seeing me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time. Monarch was entering a new phase of public recognition that would bring both opportunities and challenges. But through it all, one thing remained constant: the quiet certainty I had built within myself, the knowledge that regardless of external validation or criticism, I knew my own worth. I had proven it not just to my doubting father or skeptical sisters, but to myself. And that, ultimately, was the greatest success of all. 1 year after the revelation at the family reunion, I stood before an audience of over 500 people at the National Business Women's Leadership Conference. The spotlight made the diamond pin on my lapel, Monarch's logo rendered in precious stones, a gift from my team on our 5th anniversary, sparkle as I addressed the gathered entrepreneurs, executives, and aspiring business leaders. Success isn't measured by the validation we receive from others, I told them, my voice carrying throughout the ballroom. It's measured by the impact we create, the lives we touch, and the integrity with which we pursue our visions. Sometimes, the greatest achievements grow in the shadows, nurtured not by external praise, but by unwavering self-belief. From my position on stage, I could see Catherine and Morgan in the 3rd row, both having taken time from their busy schedules to attend my keynote address. Morgan's expression was attentive, analytical, still competitive, but now with genuine respect. Catherine beamed with sisterly pride, occasionally nodding as my words resonated with her. My father sat beside them, his posture straight as ever, but his expression softer than it had been for most of my life. The past year had transformed our relationship in ways I hadn't thought possible. Not a perfect reconciliation, Too many years of misunderstanding couldn't be erased entirely, but a new foundation built on mutual respect rather than expectation and disappointment. Many of you have read about my journey, I continued. How I built Monarch in secrecy while my own family believed I was struggling professionally. Some called it deception, others called it strategy. I call it necessary protection, for both my company and my confidence during those vulnerable early stages. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Many were young women at the beginning of their careers, facing the same battles of perception and expectation that I had confronted. But here's what I didn't understand then, what I've learned since revealing my success. Hiding your light doesn't just keep others from seeing it. It can eventually prevent you from seeing it clearly yourself. There's power in standing fully in your truth, in allowing your achievements to be witnessed and recognized, not for validation, but for impact. The journey to this stage had been extraordinary. In the year since the Forbes article and family reunion, Monarch had experienced exponential growth. Our client list had doubled. Our valuation had tripled. We'd opened offices in Singapore, London, and Dubai, with plans for further expansion into emerging markets. More meaningful than the commercial success, however, was the cultural impact. Monarch's story, my story, had struck a chord with thousands of people, particularly women, who had felt underestimated or overlooked in their professional lives. My inbox overflowed daily with messages from entrepreneurs who'd been inspired to launch their own ventures, from corporate employees who'd found courage to advocate for their ideas, from students who'd chosen to pursue unconventional paths despite family pressure. The greatest obstacle to achievement isn't external, I told the audience. It's the internalized doubt we absorb from others' limited perceptions of us. When someone repeatedly tells you that you'll fail, you begin to hear that voice even when they're not in the room. Breaking free from that voice, replacing it with your own conviction, that's the first and most crucial step toward extraordinary accomplishment. As I spoke, I thought about how far I'd come from that devastated young woman standing in Preston Consulting's lobby with a box of personal items, calling my father for comfort only to receive criticism. How that moment of rejection had crystallized into determination. How that determination had built Monarch, piece by careful piece. I'm often asked if I regret the years of secrecy, I continued, if I wish I'd revealed my success earlier to silence the doubters in my life. The honest answer is no. That period of building in silence taught me to measure my worth by my own standards, not by others' recognition. It taught me that validation is satisfying but ultimately unnecessary for achievement. After concluding my speech to enthusiastic applause, I joined my family for dinner at Marcello's, the same restaurant where Catherine and I had reconnected, the evening after my father's first visit to Monarch's offices. What had begun as a tentative reconciliation dinner had evolved into a monthly tradition, a chance to rebuild family bonds on more authentic terms. "Remarkable speech, Eleanor," my father said as our appetizers arrived, particularly the points about internal versus external obstacles. Very insightful. Coming from him, a man who had spent decades as the most formidable external obstacle in my life, the comment carried layers of meaning. We had discussed this irony during one of our more candid conversations in recent months, acknowledging both his contribution to my self-doubt and, paradoxically, to the determination that overcame it. I especially liked the part about measuring success by impact rather than validation, Catherine added. We're implementing similar principles at the Pediatric Center now, focusing on patient outcomes rather than prestigious publications or grants. Morgan, never one for sentimentality, cut to practical matters. The conference organizers mentioned you turned down their honorarium. Why? You earned it. I directed it to their scholarship fund for young female entrepreneurs instead, I explained. Monarch is doing well enough that I can afford to redirect personal speaking fees to causes that align with our values. Morgan shook her head, but she was smiling. Always the idealist, but I have to admit, it's working for you. She raised her wine glass. To the sister who proved us all wrong, gloriously, undeniably wrong. We clinked glasses, the moment light yet significant. A year ago, such an acknowledgement from Morgan would have been unthinkable. She had always positioned herself as the successful sister, the one who had followed the proper path to achievement. Acknowledging my success, achieved through utterly different means, had required her to reconsider her own definitions of accomplishment. "Eleanor," my father said as our entrees arrived, "I wanted to discuss something with all of you present." His tone had shifted, becoming more formal. "I've been considering my estate planning recently." Catherine and Morgan exchanged glances. This was typically a fraught topic in families, especially one with our history of perceived favoritism. "I've traditionally planned to divide everything equally among the three of you," he continued. "But recent events have caused me to reconsider that approach." I tensed involuntarily. Was he going to reduce my share because I had built my own success? Increase it as some form of compensation for years of underestimation? Either outcome felt problematic. "I've decided," he said, looking directly at me, "to establish a foundation instead. The Reed Family Foundation for Entrepreneurial Innovation. And I'd like you, Eleanor, to determine its direction and leadership." The proposal caught me completely by surprise. "A foundation?" He nodded. "Your work with Monarch has shown me how transformative the right support can be for struggling businesses and the communities that depend on them. I'd like my legacy to extend that impact, to provide resources for entrepreneurs who might otherwise be overlooked, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds or with unconventional approaches." I glanced at my sisters, concerned about their reactions, but both seemed genuinely comfortable with the plan. Catherine was nodding thoughtfully, and even Morgan appeared approving. "We discussed it already," Catherine explained, reading my expression. "Dad approached us separately first to ensure we supported the idea." "And you do?" I asked, still processing the proposal. Morgan shrugged. "Michael and I are doing fine. So are Catherine and James. None of us need Dad's money to secure our futures. But using it to extend the kind of work you're doing with Monarch, that's a legacy worth building." The generosity of their response, both my father's vision and my sister's support, moved me deeply. This wasn't about compensation or favoritism. It was about recognizing value and maximizing impact, about transforming our family's resources into opportunities for others who might, like me, have the potential to build something meaningful if given the right chance. "I'm honored," I said finally. "And I accept, though I'd want both of you involved as well." I looked at my sisters. "Your perspectives and expertise would be invaluable." The discussion turned to possibilities for the foundation, scholarship programs, mentorship initiatives, seed funding for innovative startups addressing social challenges. As we talked, I marveled at how completely our family dynamic had evolved. From criticism to collaboration, from judgment to joint vision, from dismissal to determination to create something meaningful together. Later that evening, as we walked to our respective cars, my father hung back slightly, indicating he wanted a private word. "You've changed more than just your own life this past year, Eleanor," he said quietly. "You've changed all of ours made us question our assumptions, reconsider our priorities." I hadn't expected such directness from him. "That wasn't my intention." "Perhaps not consciously," he acknowledged. "But revolutions rarely announce themselves as such. They simply reveal what was possible all along, if we'd had eyes to see it." We reached my car, no longer the chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce of the dramatic revelation, but a sleek electric luxury sedan I drove myself. Thomas had returned to his regular clients after that single theatrical entrance had served its purpose. There's something else I wanted to tell you, my father continued. Something I should have said years ago. I waited, curious what further revelation might be coming. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just about your potential, but about what success looks like. About the paths that lead to meaningful achievement. I was measuring by a narrow standard that couldn't accommodate your particular brilliance. The admission, so straightforward, so unqualified, seemed to release something long held in both of us. In him, perhaps, the burden of infallibility he had carried for decades. In me, the lingering need for his specific acknowledgement of his misperception. Thank you for saying. That, I replied. It matters even now. He nodded, understanding. Drive safely, Eleanor. We'll talk more about the foundation next week. As I watched him walk toward his own car, still straight-backed and dignified at 70, but somehow less rigid than before, I reflected on how thoroughly my revelation had transformed not just my life but our entire family ecosystem. The ripples had extended far beyond my initial expectations, changing relationships, priorities, and future plans in ways I couldn't have foreseen. The next morning, I arrived early at Monarch's headquarters. The company now occupied 3 full floors of the Archer building, with over 200 employees worldwide, and a client list that included Fortune 500 companies alongside promising startups and struggling mid-sized businesses in need of revitalization. Julian met me at the elevator, tablet in hand as always. At 43, he remained the calm, efficient center around which Monarch's operations revolved. His role had evolved along with the company, expanding from executive assistant to chief of staff, with significant input on strategic decisions and client selection. Good morning, Ms. Reed. Your speech was quite impactful yesterday. The social media response has been extraordinary. Thank you, Julian. Any pressing matters requiring immediate attention? He consulted his tablet. The Singapore office needs your final approval on the Chen Logistics proposal. The development team has completed the beta version of the analytics platform upgrade, and he hesitated slightly. There's a young woman waiting in your office. She arrived without an appointment, but she was rather insistent about seeing you specifically. I raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. Who is she? She identified herself as Zoe Patel, recent graduate from State University's business program. She said you'd want to hear her proposal personally. The name wasn't familiar, but her boldness intrigued me. I have 20 minutes before the executive committee meeting. I'll see her now. When I entered my office, a young woman stood by the windows, gazing out at the city below. She turned quickly at my entrance, mid-20s, South Asian descent, wearing a simple but professional outfit that suggested limited funds but careful attention to appearance. The same kind of outfit I'd worn to early client meetings when Monarch was just beginning. Ms. Reed, she said, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. Thank you for seeing me. I'm Zoe Patel. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. I gestured toward the seating area rather than positioning myself behind my desk. This wasn't a formal meeting, but an exploration of her purpose, her potential. Julian mentioned you have a proposal, I said once we were seated. I'm curious. What brought you here without an appointment? She smiled, unabashed. Necessity, and perhaps a touch of desperation. I've been trying to secure a meeting through conventional channels for weeks, but when you're a recent graduate with a non-traditional background, those channels aren't designed for you. The echo of my own early experiences was striking. So, you decided to simply show up. I decided to demonstrate my commitment rather than just describe it, she corrected. Actions over words, a principle I believe Monarch values, based on your fee structure and operational approach. Her research impressed me. Most hopeful candidates focused on my personal story rather than Monarch's business model. What's your proposal, Ms. Patel? She leaned forward slightly, intensity radiating from her entire being. I've developed a specialized application of Monarch's methodologies for micro-businesses in underserved communities. Enterprises too small for your current client threshold, but collectively representing significant economic and social impact potential. She opened her tablet, displaying a presentation with market analyses, case studies, and financial projections, showing how Monarch's approaches could be adapted and scaled for smaller businesses with minimal resource investment, but maximum community impact. These are businesses typically overlooked by traditional consulting firms, she continued. Family restaurants, neighborhood repair shops, local service providers. They employ local residents, serve community needs, and circulate money within economically vulnerable areas. But they lack access to the kind of expertise Monarch provides to larger companies. As she walked me through her analysis, I was struck by the parallels to my own journey. The recognition of overlooked potential, the commitment to proving value through measurable impact, the courage to bypass conventional channels when necessary to be heard. Why bring this to Monarch? I asked when she had finished. You could implement this approach independently. Build your own consulting practice focused on this market segment. She didn't hesitate. Because Monarch has the infrastructure, reputation, and proven methodologies that would allow this approach to scale rapidly. And because I believe in your vision, that the most meaningful success comes from elevating what others have dismissed or overlooked. I studied her for a moment, recognizing in her determination and insight a reflection of my younger self. What would you need from Monarch to pilot this approach? She blinked, clearly surprised I was taking her proposal seriously. A small team, access to your analytics platform, mentorship from senior consultants familiar with adapting your methodologies to unique client circumstances, and your backing when skeptics question whether these micro-businesses are worth the investment. The last point revealed her understanding of corporate politics and the resistance innovative approaches often face, another sign of her perceptiveness. Leave your presentation with Julian, I decided. I'd like our innovation team to review it. And come back next Tuesday at 2 p.m. We'll have questions, concerns, and potentially a framework for how this might work as a pilot initiative. Her expression shifted from hopeful to elated. Thank you, Ms. Reed. I'll be prepared. As she gathered her materials, I asked one final question. Why this particular focus, Ms. Patel? What draws you to these overlooked businesses? She paused, considering whether to give the professional answer or the personal one. Finally, she chose authenticity. My parents owned a small grocery store in a neighborhood other businesses had abandoned. When an economic downturn hit, they struggled to adapt, not because their business wasn't viable, but because they lacked the expertise to navigate changing conditions. They lost everything: their business, our home, their dignity. She met my eyes directly. No one saw their potential worth saving. I believe there are thousands of similar businesses on the same precipice right now. Businesses that could thrive with the right guidance. Businesses that matter to their communities, even if they don't matter to traditional consulting firms. I nodded, understanding completely. Tuesday at 2 p.m., Ms. Patel, and bring your implementation timeline. If we move forward, I want this. Piloted within 60 days. After she left, I remained seated, reflecting on the symmetry of the moment. 5 years ago, I had been the outsider with an unconventional approach, determined to prove the value of businesses others had written off. Now I was in a position to open doors for someone else with a similar vision but different focus. The circle was completing itself. The lessons I had learned through building Monarch, both professionally and personally, were becoming seeds for new growth, new impact extending beyond what I could create directly. Julian entered with my schedule for the remainder of the day. The executive committee is gathering in the main conference room. Mr. Abernathy is particularly interested in discussing the European expansion timeline. Thank you, Julian. And please have the innovation team review Ms. Patel's presentation before Tuesday. I think she may have identified a significant opportunity." He nodded, making a note. "She reminded me of someone," he observed with the faintest hint of a smile. "Yes," I acknowledged. "Me too." As I gathered my materials for the executive committee meeting, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From the devastated young woman clutching a box of personal items after being laid off, to the determined entrepreneur building a company in secret while her family believed she was failing, to the revealed success standing in the full light of recognition, to the mentor opening doors for the next generation of innovators. Each phase had been necessary. Each challenge had shaped not just my professional capabilities, but my understanding of true worth, that it comes not from others' perceptions, but from internal conviction and measurable impact. My father had been both wrong and right. Wrong about my potential, about the validity of my unconventional path, but right that I needed to be pushed to achieve everything I was capable of becoming. His doubt, painful as it had been, had helped forge my determination. His dismissal had fueled my drive to prove that success comes in many forms, not just the traditional paths he recognized. As I walked into the conference room where Monarch's leadership team awaited my direction, I carried that understanding with me, that our greatest achievements often grow from our deepest wounds, that being underestimated can become a powerful advantage when it teaches us to rely on our own judgment rather than external validation, that sometimes the people who believe in us least are the ones who inadvertently push us to achieve the most. And most importantly, that success isn't defined by proving others wrong, though that satisfaction is certainly real, but by creating something meaningful on your own terms, something that reflects your values, extends your impact, and opens doors for others who might otherwise be overlooked, just as I had been, just as I would never be again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.